It's all been Rush. All those stories.
So I didn't have to be afraid of opening my door every Pesach at the end of the meal?
No.
Test.
All those years.
Who is tap?
Trevor just said test. I can hear you. That you, Larry?
Tap.
Test.
We can hear you, Larry.
All right, thank you.
Hello, hey Drew.
Rabbi B.
Hello.
Rabbi.
You can have super and you can have natural. You cannot have super.
Rabbi W.
There's
Yes.
Santa Claus in the middle.
All kinds of
What?
extra.
And Larry, there is no Santa Claus.
Oh,
You know it's a
you
story.
just burst my bubble.
If you watch,
Talk about cacophony.
and if you watch the Marx Brothers, you'll know there ain't no Santa Claus.
Exactly.
Got better?
There you are.
Hi.
Hello, Hellers.
Hey Lou.
Hi.
Hey, Rabbi.
Everyone.
Hey, Lou.
Hi, Lou.
Hey Lou, you got popcorn and you're not sharing with me?
We have a stuffed cabbage here.
Ooh, sounds good.
Yeah,
Ooh.
yeah. So food for the mind and food for the body.
That's you know which one I'd go with.
No, let me see.
Barbara's iPad
Yes.
is getting much better at centering her face into the iPad.
I'm holding it further away.
Yes, I can see you. It's very nice.
Looking good.
I'm working on it. I'm working on trying to get my COVID vaccine scheduled. I don't know.
Oh, you haven't got one yet?
No.
I haven't either.
Wow.
Wow.
Barbara Brown,
I don't know.
she's holding the wrong direction. That's why.
Oh.
Jacob just started working in a dentist's office, and he's going to one of the 24/7 ones. He was able to get an appointment at 3 a.m. on Sunday.
Oh.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
He got the appointment then, or he's going to in the middle?
No, he got the appointment for this Sunday at 3 a.m. I thought he was joking, and I looked up the place, and nope, New York City just opened up 3 24/7
Wow.
COVID
I'm
vaccines.
sure there are plenty of people that would be willing to go at all times of hours if they could get them.
You know what? You're
Absolutely.
right. If that was the time I could go, I would go.
Absolutely.
This,
Hello, Lori.
that's because of when you turn yours this way.
We're going on Saturday for our first shot,
Mazel
Mazel
tov.
tov.
Mazel tov.
but we got to drive over to Jersey Shore Medical Center, but we're going.
You know what? It's worth it.
Yep, exactly.
Get the
That's not
shot.
bad,
Once you have the first shot, you're on your way.
Right.
But that's only 50% effective.
Well, I'll take anything. I got mine last
The reality
Saturday.
Better
is,
than nothing.
right, and once you get your first shot, you're not going to die from it, no matter what happens.
We
Yeah.
got our shots.
They
Hello,
scheduled the
doctor.
second shot.
Years.
We have a doctor here. We could ask him too. You don't have to listen to me. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about.
You're a
It's the
doctor.
beer. Why, you can always call my daughter.
Of course, that never stopped me from talking, but
Never.
We
My
got,
doctor told me
Yeah.
we'll still be wearing masks in June. That's all I know.
Yes,
I think we're gonna be
we will
wearing
still be
masks
wearing
for season.
masks.
the years down the road, we're gonna be wearing masks.
You're absolutely right, Linda. Yep.
Because you know why? There's so many people out there that don't want to get the vaccine. So
That's
you
true.
don't know if they're carriers. And if the vaccines that we're getting are only 95%.
yes,
That
but
means
even,
one,
Only 95.
the fact is that they're the ones who are going to be in trouble, not you. If you get your shots, get both your shots.
oh, absolutely.
And then that's as good as you can be. And if you, God forbid, if you do get it, it's like getting the flu. That's all.
Well, they say you
Yeah.
should still wear a mask even if you've gotten both shots because you can still be a carrier.
Hey, Karen.
Oh, yeah.
So you have to
Definitely.
wear a mask to protect other people.
Yes, you have to wear a mask.
Yeah, you,
Absolutely right.
not one,
you
but
have to wear a
two.
mask.
Now they're
Plus-
saying two, now they're recommending
You can
two.
wear a mask and not rubber band.
It's the way I look. It's all right to wear a mask.
What were you asking? Is that who?
Does that the team?
No.
Ay.
Oh, Kamala.
Yes. How are you?
Compared to whom? I'm fine.
No, exactly. Compared to me, I'm just tired. It's been a very long week.
Yeah, it has.
Does everybody have their
Hello,
Jewish
Pat.
laser?
There's
What, doctor?
Do you have your Jewish space laser with you tonight?
You know, it's amazing how much power we have, you know?
It really is.
hard to believe. Space laser.
And you know, I would think that anti-Semites would be scared to death of us. You know, really.
We might laser them, you could tell.
That's right. You know, I once told somebody, I said, you know, I am a member of the International Jewish Conspiracy. And I said, so how come I don't know we have all this power?
Yeah.
You know, how come I don't know that? What did I miss the memo? You know, really, I don't get it.
All right, forgive me, everyone. I just muted all of us so that we can officially begin tonight. We are live on YouTube, so just beware you're on candid camera. I'm Adina Blum, Rabbi of Congregation Beth Chaim, and it is my pleasure for our third and final night of this show to invite Rabbi Eric Wisnia, our Rabbi Emeritus, for the third session on the history of ancient Israel. So Rabbi Wisnia, tag, you're in. Just have to unmute you, sir. Here, I'll push that button. Oh, you're still muted, my dear.
Mute. Am I unmuted?
We can hear you now.
Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, who makes us special with commandments and commands us to get smart. So you remember the thrilling days of yesteryear. We left our heroes. They came out of Egypt, so I firmly believe, in the year 1250 on Passover at exactly 6 a.m. in the morning. And they went to Mount Sinai. And then from Mount Sinai, they went wandering around the desert. And sometime around the year 1210, BCE, they made it to the land of Canaan. And in Canaan, we settled. And we lived among the Canaanim, the Canaanites, and all their 20 little city-states that were not organized, that fought each other. We settled in the land between these cities, and we lived with them, and we fought with them. However, by the time we get down to the year 1030, that's the year 1030, not 1030 in the morning, but in the year 1030 BCE, almost 200 years of living in the land of Canaan, totally unorganized, totally disagreeing with each other, 12 separate tribes at best, if not more, that did not get along. We finally ran up against the major enemy who could not be defeated. The Canaanites were not organized. So all their 20 little city-states, we fought with them. Some we destroyed, some we didn't destroy, some we intermarried with, whatever. Read the book of Judges and Joshua, you'll see. But by the time you get to the year 1030 BCE, we got archaeological proof for just about everything the Torah is telling us. And what is the Torah telling us? That we met our match. When we reached Canaan after Egypt, another group also moved into Canaan. They were a bunch of Greeks. They were from the island of Crete. Most of the time, the local Canaanites just called them the sea people because they came off their boats, landed in the Gaza Strip, set up 5 city-states on the Greek model in a league, and we Jews have been having trouble with Gaza ever since. From the year 1250 BCE until today, Gaza has been a pain in our tuchus. What can I tell you? And it took us a long time, let me tell you. So, the Philistines or as they're technically called, Pelishtim. They are Greeks. They are organized. They have Greek military organization. They have chariots. They have heavy iron chariots with scythes on their wheels, so they're very vicious. They have phalanxes, and they know what they're about. And they were organized with their 5 city-states. So right away, they become a major threat to Israel. You remember the last of the great judges, Shimshon, Samson, who tried to stand against the Philistines, but he was killed by the Philistines. At that point, the 12 tribes of Israel are panic-stricken. They realize that the Philistine military machine is so strong that they cannot defeat it. And so the leading prophet of the day, a man by the name of Samuel, speaks to God, prays to God, and is given the information that a man, Shaul, son of Kish, from the tribe of Benjamin, the tiniest, weakest little tribe, should be anointed king of Israel. And he is elected by the tribal leaders because Samuel recommends to them that this is God's choice. And so the leaders all agree. And the 12 tribal leaders all elect Saul as the first king of Israel in the year approximately 1030 BCE. And we are of two minds. On one hand, we think it's a great thing to have a king. At least we'll be organized. We'll have somebody in charge. There won't be pandemonium. On the other hand, who made him the boss? God made him the boss? Yeah, in his own mind, God made him the boss. We Jews are a nation of kings. Each one of us is a king and a priest. We talk directly to God. We don't listen to the king. We disagree with the king. And we made poor Saul's life miserable. Miserable. For approximately 20 years, Saul and his family tried to organize the 12 tribes, tried to fight against the Philistines. Finally, Saul he's tearing his hair out. Everybody is fighting with Saul. All the tribal elders. The tribe of Judah, the biggest tribe, even appoints their own local favorite son, a boy by the name of David, to be in charge of Judah, in direct opposition to Saul. Now, Saul tries to deal with this. He tries to marry his daughter. Well, he does. He marries his daughter Michal off to David so that David will understand when Saul dies, David becomes king. You know, he's married to the daughter of the king. He's next in line. That doesn't make David happy. He still spends his days undermining and double-crossing Saul. Finally, Saul and his son, they go up to Mount Gilboa. They ask all the tribes, send men. We're going to meet the Philistines at Mount Gilboa. We're going to fight them. And this will be the smackdown at Mount Gilboa. We'll finally put an end to the Philistines. David makes a point of telling all the tribes, I ain't going. You shouldn't go either. So guess what? Saul and his personal bodyguard go up to Mount Gilboa, and they are wiped out to a man by the Philistines. Now, the 12 tribes are very nervous. Our king, who had no power, who couldn't tax, who couldn't demand soldiers, he could only ask each tribe to have soldiers. Our king, who was at the whim of the tribal leaders, just got killed. Now, suddenly, the Philistines are rampaging, and we have nobody. So, I don't know how many of you saw Richard III by Billy Shakespeare. They offered the crown to King Dave of Judah. And King Dave pulls a Richard III. I wouldn't want to be king. If I were king of Israel, I'd demand the power to tax the hell out of you. You people don't want to pay taxes to a central government. You don't need a king. No, we need a king. We're desperate. I wouldn't want to be king because you people elect your king and you want your king to be responsible to the tribal elders. And I got to make my own decisions on a split second. You know, when you're fighting the Philistines, you can't call a council. You wouldn't want to elect me king. No, Dave, we need you to be king. We'll give you all the power you want. And you wouldn't want to elect me king because I demand to have a personal army that I'm in charge of. Not this business that every tribe sends their own militia when they're in the mood. I got to be able to command an army. Dave, we need you. We'll vote for you to be king. Well, all right. If you promise to give me the power to tax, if you promise to give me the power to make all the decisions on the spur of the moment if I need to, and if you promise to allow me to run the military without tribal elders interfering, I just might be your king. Well, guess what, folks? In the year 1210 BCE, David, who had been ruling Judah, is elected king of Israel, David HaMelech, and he is tough. He is a brilliant tactician. He is a tough soldier, and he smites the Philistines a mighty smiting. In fact, he smites all the enemies of Israel, and he takes the 12 tribes and wields them into a powerful nation. Now, the reason that he could do this was the fact that the Egyptians were in decline and the Babylonians were in decline. So the two big anchor stores on our Middle East strip mall were falling apart. So the little mom and pop store right in the middle, now known as King David's Israel, becomes ascendant. And for 200 years is pretty powerful. David is a strong and powerful king. The Bible recounts his history. He's a tough cookie, let me tell you. The idea of him being a simple shepherd who wrote a lot of psalms is a very nice image, but don't believe it for 1 second. David was tough and he was powerful. David was, you can read the stories. One of my favorite is, of course, his story about Bathsheba, and there's several others. But anyway, David rules Israel, and David is very successful as a king. He takes Jerusalem from one of the Canaanite tribes and slaughters the population and makes it his own personal city. And he makes that his capital. So that the capital of Israel now is in the middle of the 12 tribes, but the land does not belong to any of the 12 tribes. It belongs to David personally. So you can see that he centralizes our government and he makes it powerful. He takes the ark, which we had carried with us from Mount Sinai. He takes that ark and he houses it in a temple that he builds in Jerusalem. He doesn't finish building a temple, he starts to build the temple. His son Solomon finishes the temple. David centralizes our monarchy, our politics, and our religion in the city of Jerusalem, so that by the year 1000, Jerusalem is a Jewish city with a monarchy, and we are a country. And much of Israel, much of Jordan, this is now part of our country of Israel. The temple is the center of the religious cult. He makes a priesthood and formalizes it. He abolishes all the local shrines that had existed in all of the 12 tribes and centralizes all of the animal sacrifice cult in Jerusalem in his temple run by his personally appointed priest. The Jewish religion begins as you and I know it, with animal sacrifice and a temple and a capital, Jerusalem. David rules for 40 years. All I will tell you is the last story about King David, because I think it is the most indicative. I will read from the first book of Kings in our Bible, chapter 2. When David's time drew near, he charged Solomon his son, saying, the time to die, I am about to go the way of all the earth, my son. Be strong and show yourself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes and his commandments and his ordinances and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do wherever you are turning, that the Lord may establish his word, which he spoke concerning me, saying, if your sons take heed to their ways, to walk before me, Adonai, in faithfulness, with all their heart and with all their soul, there shall not fail you a man on the throne of Israel. Pretty nice final words, huh? Yeah, that was the official farewell. Then the text continues. He said, that's what he says publicly to all the people drawn up in the court. Then he calls his son Solomon over. And he says, beginning on verse 5, you can look it up, 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 5 following. It's hysterical. It's right out of The Godfather. David says, Shloime, come here. Shloime bends down. David whispers in his ear, I want you to look over there behind me. You see Yoav, son of Tzeruiah? Don't look at him. Just listen. Nod your head and smile. You remember what he did to the two commanders of the armies of Israel, Abner and Amasa, who I told him to leave alone, whom he murdered, avenging what he thought was a blood guilt? Putting innocent blood he killed. Solomon, as soon as I'm dead, kill him. And you remember, do according to your wisdom. Remember Barzillai, he's over there. Him you can look at, smile, nod. Barzillai, let him be among those who sit at your table. For he was loyal to me when I was in trouble and when I fled from Absalom, your brother. And then over on the other side, don't look at him, but just nod and smile. There sits Shimei ben Gera from the tribe of Benjamin, who cursed me with a grievous curse on the day when I was fleeing from Machanaim, and he came down to meet me by the Jordan River. And he did not attack me because I swore to him by the Lord, saying, I will not put you or your family to death by the sword. Now, therefore, Shloime, as soon as I'm dead, don't hold him guiltless, for you're a wise man and you'll know what you ought to do to Shimei and his boys. Bring his gray hair down to Sheol with blood. And David dies. A sweet father's last words to his son. And Shloime, Solomon becomes the second king of Israel. Of course, he has to be elected by the 12 tribes leaders. He convenes the 12 tribes and they elect him king. Solomon is as tough and as strong as David, but David has already created the monarchy. Solomon takes the next 30 to 40 years and builds Israel into a strong, powerful monarchy. The 12 tribes still exist. However, they have very, very little power. The tribal leaders have very little power. The temple becomes more and more the center of our nation. Shabbat and the sacrifices become very important. The holidays that you think of, Pesach, Sukkot, Shavuot, these become national holidays. The new moons are celebrated. For the 80 years that David ran Israel with Solomon, there is peace and prosperity, and the nation becomes powerful and a united monarchy. And we lived happily ever after. Well, not exactly. Because after we had two powerful and strong kings, Solomon died. Solomon died and left a son whose name was Rehav Am. In English, we call him Rehoboam. I don't know why, because his name was Rehav Am. Rehav Am was no Solomon, and he was no David. He takes over in the year 930 BCE. At least he's supposed to take over. Solomon dies, and there's been a lot of unhappiness because David was very powerful and taxed the hell out of the people. Solomon was very powerful, went on massive public works campaigns, finished building the temple, built up all the cities. He had a lot of public works, and he had a lot of taxes. The tribal leaders were beginning to chafe under Solomon, but nobody crossed Solomon. He was very strong. Rehav Am, the grandson of David, son of Solomon, in the year 930, is standing as the king to be elected by the tribal leaders. Unfortunately for Rehav Am, there were a lot of tribal leaders who were not happy. One of them was a fellow from Ephraim whose name was Yerav Am, or Jeroboam, as we like to call him. And his name, Jeroboam, son of Nevat. And he was one of the tribal leaders who was saying, you know, Solomon taxed the hell out of us. I didn't like that. Solomon was powerful. I didn't like that. And some of the northern leaders begin to rally around him. Well, of course, Rehavam is no slouch, and he threatens to have Jeroboam assassinated. So Jeroboam decides it's a good time to go visit Egypt. And he runs down south, and he goes to visit Egypt. Rehavam, meanwhile, meets with the 12 tribal leaders. And the 12 tribal leaders, and he says to them, you know, I am a grandson of David, I am the son of Solomon, and I'm about to be elected king. So vote for me, I'm going to be king. And the tribal leaders say to him, you know, Rehavam, your grandpa and your daddy were big taxers. They were big, strong men. How about you cede a little more power to the tribal elders? How about you tax us a little bit less? How about we have a little bit of democracy, not a lot? Rehavam meets with Solomon's advisors. Solomon's advisors, of course, are all old men. And they meet with Rehavam and they say, listen, Rehav, you got to get yourself elected by the tribal leaders. Smile, talk nice, say whatever you want during the political campaign, tack towards the middle, and once you're elected, you rule however you want. They're not going to be able to touch you. So play it nice now, fella. Rehavam's young Turks all say to him, dude, this is the test. If you let them walk on you now, they will walk on you your entire reign. You cannot allow them to do this. And so I shift over to 1 Kings chapter 11, and we tune in to this scene. Now, one of the prophets, a man by the name of Achiah from Shiloh, he found Jeroboam on the road back to Jerusalem from Egypt. And Achiah clad himself in clothes so nobody could see him, and he went to find Jeroboam. And Achiah found him, and he said to him, take for yourself 10 pieces of this garment that I have. For the Lord God of Israel has come to me and said, I am about to tear the kingdom from the hand of Solomon's son, and I will give you 10 tribes. And he shall only have the one tribe, the tribe of David, which is Judah, and the city of Jerusalem. But Rehavam has forsaken me. He has bowed down to Ashtaroth, the goddess of Sidon. He has bowed down to Chemosh, the god of Moab. He has bowed down to Milcom, the god of Ammon. And he has not walked in my ways, doing what is right and keeping my statutes and my ordinances, as David his father did. Nevertheless, I will not take the whole kingdom out of his hand, but I will make him ruler for all the days of his life, for the sake of David, my servant, whom I chose. And so, I command you, hearken to all that I command you, and walk in my ways, and do what is right in my eyes, and keep my statutes and my commandments as David, my servant, did. And then, Yeravam, I will be with you, and will build you a monarchy as surely as I built for David, and I will give Israel to you. And so, Rehavam went, not knowing this, he goes back to the tribal leaders, and he says to them, I thought about what you said, and I want you to know that my little finger is thicker than my daddy's thigh. You think he was tough? You ain't seen nothing. I want you tribal leaders to shut up and leave me alone. Whereupon the 10 northern tribes left Jerusalem, went to the city of Shechem, met Jeroboam, son of Nevat, and elected him king of the 10 northern tribes. Judah and probably Benjamin stayed loyal, because remember, Saul was from Benjamin, the original king. They were loyal to the house of David, and the 10 northern tribes were not loyal to David's house anymore. They chose Jeroboam ben Nevat. And so, folks, in the year 930, we Jews had 2 independent monarchies. 10 northern tribes calling themselves the children of Israel, with a new king and a monarchy in the city of Shechem. After Jeroboam, the next king moved it over a couple of miles to the east to the city of Samaria, to Shomron, and that became the capital. And the son of Solomon, Rehavam, and his descendants ruling the southern 2 tribes, essentially the tribe of Judah, out of the house of Jerusalem. 2 independent countries. The northern monarchy immediately began to set up its own temple for its own animal sacrifices. And Jeroboam built 2 different temples. One at the city of Bethel, and the other way up north by the headwaters of the Jordan and the Chetzbani River, and that at the city of Dan. Now, the temple at Bethel, of course, Bethel is in Arab hands, and there's no archaeology ever going to go on there. But at Dan, it was in Israeli hands, and the Hebrew Union College, my rabbinic school, excavated where the temple was at Dan and actually found the altar. You can go to Dan now and find the altar where the 10 northern tribes made animal sacrifice. It's amazing. Of course, when I was there with my Israeli guide, I was like overwhelmed to see this and say, this is where my ancestors worshipped, 3,000 years ago. And he says, your ancestors, they were pagans. I said, come on. You mean the way the Judahites chopped up animals in Jerusalem was the way God liked it? The way the Israelites chopped up animals at Dan, God didn't like it? I said, you're such a product of Israeli history. You're convinced that the Judahites in Jerusalem were good and the Israelites in the north were bad. There's no reason to believe that. Both of them were a bunch of schmagegis. Bunch of them were ruled by petty monarchs, some of whom were occasionally decent, most of whom were not. If we look at the northern kingdom, the kingdom of Israel, the one that Jeroboam, son of Nevat, organized, it existed for 200 years. It had its capital first at Shechem, then at Shomron. It had 2 different temples. It was totally unstable. Strong men would constantly take over the monarchy. There were 9 different families that ruled Israel in those 210 years. There were 19 kings of Israel, 8 of whom were assassinated by their successor. Israel was weak, although it was large. It was the larger of the 2 kingdoms. It was very weak. It was very, they had a lot of foreign worship. One of the most famous of the Israelite kings was a man by the name of Ahab. And he is known for, of course, marrying Jezebel and bringing the worship of Baal into Israel, so that the northern kingdom was syncretistic. They had temples, but they had worship of other gods. Sometimes they didn't. Sometimes a new king would arise and he would get rid of all the idols and he would purge and purify the country, but sooner or later they would start worshiping foreign gods. The southern kingdom remained loyal to the house of David, and for 200 years, the 2 kingdoms looked at each other across the border, were nasty to each other, sniped at each other. Neither was powerful enough to conquer the other. Sometimes they would agree. For instance, when Ammon would attack, sometimes the 2 of them would ally to fight off the Ammonites or the Moabites. But more likely, one of them would ally with the Moabites and attack the other one. But they were never strong enough to conquer each other. All this came to a head in the year 721. In the year 721, 200 years after the establishment of the Kingdom of Israel, the empire of Ashur, now we call it Assyria. Why we call it Assyria, I don't know, because it has nothing to do with Syria. It's southern Turkey. It's actually Kurdistan. That's Ashur. The kingdom of Ashur swept over the entire Middle East. They conquered all of Babylonia, all of the Mesopotamia. They moved on Israel, and in the year 721, the Assyrian king Shalmaneser V sacked Samaria, destroyed both of the temples in Dan and Bethel, and obliterated the 10 northern tribes. What he did was typical Assyrian policy. He took the men from Israel and moved them to another country. He left all the women in Israel, brought in men from another country, forced them to live there, forcibly married them to the Israelite women, and said, all right, you people figure out how to talk to each other, how to farm, and how to create a country. My army's going to sit here and watch you. Well, obviously, this was not an effective way to bring prosperity to anybody, because the countries were full. They couldn't even farm. People couldn't even talk to their spouse. There was absolute pandemonium. The Assyrian army was the only thing that brought law and order to the Assyrian Empire. It was very powerful and very strong, but the Assyrian people were decimated. The people of Ashur did well, but all the areas where they were conquered did not do well. In Israel, this created the myth of the 10 lost tribes. The men were taken to other places and intermarried. They did intermarry and they totally assimilated. The women in Israel were kept there, married to pagans, and kind of became a hybrid Israelite pagan nation, which we named after Samaria. We called them the Shomronim, or Samaritans. We looked upon them as half pagan, half Jews, we Judahites, and we certainly did not like them. The Assyrians moved on. They bypassed Jerusalem. They conquered Egypt, and eventually they did try and take Jerusalem. But around the year 680, Jerusalem managed to fend off the Assyrians, and their army was hit by plague as they were besieging Jerusalem. And the Assyrians decided it's not worth it. Let them have Jerusalem. Let them have the land around Jerusalem. We're going back home. It's not worth it. They can't grow anything there anyway. So the Assyrians pretty much ran the entire Middle East, except the city of Jerusalem. They obliterate Israel, and it ceases to be. From the year 721 down for the next 160, 180 years, only Judah exists. Judah and its capital, Jerusalem, run by the family of King David, which still has descendants on the throne. Israel, after they are saved in 680 by the plague that hits the Assyrian army, the king of Israel, Hizkiyahu, has a religious revival, and gets rid of all the pagan idols, and really tries to be a good boy. 50 years later, his great-great-grandson, King Josiah, totally redoes the religion of Israel. He makes sure there are no shrines anywhere. The Assyrian threat has pretty much ended because Egypt is once again on the rise. And the country in southern Mesopotamia has begun to take on northern Mesopotamia, Ashur, and now Babylonia, the nascent Babylonian Empire, is coming back, and the Assyrians are knocking it out in the middle of Mesopotamia. Egypt is moving up, and Josiah is using this to get rid of all the foreign idols, to centralize all religion in Jerusalem, to make the temple much of what we think that it was, and create the religion of Israel as we think of it. Josiah and Hezekiah are seen as great reformers in Judaism and are good kings. And that's how things stood for a while. Josiah dies trying to fight off the Egyptians. And at that point, after he is dead, the Assyrians collapse, and the Babylonians, known as the second Babylonians, the Neo-Babylonians, actually they were called Chaldeans. They called themselves Chaldeans, and we in Hebrew, we call them Kasdim. The Chaldeans, or the Neo-Babylonians, now begin to move south towards Egypt. And as you remember, the way to Egypt is through us. And so, in 597, the children of Josiah are trying to fight off the Egyptians on one side and the Babylonians on the other side, and we are caught in the middle. In 597 BCE, the king in Jerusalem makes a deal with the Babylonians. We're not going to fight you because you're too strong, so we're going to pay you tribute, we'll pay you tax money, and we will become a vassal client state to Babylonia, and we will send you troops to help you fight the Egyptians. This works for a while, but finally, about 10 years later, the king of Judah decides he doesn't want to pay tribute anymore, and that was a mistake because the Babylonians come back with a big army, and in 586 BCE, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II, he conquers Jerusalem, and he's pissed. He levels the temple, and he knocks down the city. And he takes the entire population and carries them off to Babylonia, plunks them down in the middle of Babylon, and says, "You people got to stay here where I can watch you." And in fact, it is estimated that the entire population of Jerusalem, at that time approximately 40,000 people, was transported to Babylon and lived there. Now, the rest of the population, Jerusalem was about 10% of the nation, it's estimated. So there were about 500,000 Jews living in Judah who stayed in Judah under a Babylonian governor. What kind of religion they had and what they did, we're not sure. They had their little farms, they probably had Shabbat, but they could not bring animal sacrifices to Jerusalem because there was no more temple. The Babylonians had destroyed it. Life in Babylon, where the Jews were, is very well documented. We have stories from Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Isaiah, who talk to us about life in Babylon under the Babylonians. Not only that, we have Babylonian records. The Babylonians actually become the Persians. One of the Babylonian generals was a fellow by the name of Koresh from Paras, and he engineered a military takeover of Babylon, and with Jewish help. He actually had support from the Jewish community there, and changed the name of the empire from Bavel to Paras. And so the Babylonian Empire shifts around the year 530 BCE and becomes the Persian Empire. And we Jews are now well accepted into the Persian Empire. And so life in Israel is over. The scene shifts. It shifts to Babylon, where instead of making animal sacrifices, because we have no more temple, we get together on the Sabbath and we talk about the good old days. And it seems quite clear that that's what happened in Babylon. On the Sabbath, we would get together, those 40,000 Jews who were plunked down there, who, by the way, stayed there until the year 1948. The community in Mesopotamia, the Jewish community, traces its roots from 586 BCE until 1948 of the Common Era. And in 1948, all their money was confiscated, and the population was kicked out and made to go to Israel and flee. So let's go for some questions. Anybody?
Rabbi?
Yes.
Jerry Kalstein.
Yes, sir.
Let's go back to the beginning with David.
Let's go back to the beginning
with David. Do we know if David one battle where they beat the Philistines, and what is the truth about
Philistines, and what is the truth about Goliath?
The truth about who?
Goliath.
Oh, Goliath.
Goliath.
Goliath. Little David was small, but oh my.
Little David was small.
Little David was small, but oh my. He fought Goliath, who lay down and dieth. Little David was small, but oh my. There is very little reason to doubt that the Philistines at one point did a strongman contest. We know for a fact that Achilles did this in Greece. Achilles had a 1-to-1 with another tribe in Greece, and he killed their champion, and then they surrendered. We know that from, hello? Am I on?
Yeah, we've got you.
Okay.
Paul, it sounds like every time you unmute, there's just some feedback. So I've just been muting you when we're not asking a direct question.
Okay. So we know that Achilles, also in the legends about him, that he did that. He had a 1-to-1 combat, and that's how they decided the battle. So that appears in several Greek histories. The Philistines were Greeks. So there's no reason to assume that it's a weird story. It's not. It fits with Greek culture. And the fact that David killed Goliath, a giant, if he was 6.5 feet tall, he was a giant. These were little people, they were not big. So that if Goliath was a giant, compared to who? Compared to King David, when he was a young man. So I find that a totally believable story. Because I've read the stories about Achilles doing that. I don't think that ended the Philistines at all. The Philistines ended when David destroyed them and took over their cities. But it probably did end don't forget, that was when Saul was fighting. Saul was king, and Saul was fighting the Philistines. And the fact that the Philistine champion was threatening, and David won the battle, is, I believe, totally believable. Totally, it's archaeologically very congruent with the history. Any other?
Rabbi,
Bloom.
Rabbi, I have a quickie question, if you don't mind.
I take quickie. Yes.
I take quickie.
Okay, quickie question, Rabbi. You're talking about Mesopotamia. Where is that area now? What would it be called now?
Mesopotamia at the moment is Iraq. Iraq.
Yeah. Rabbi, this is Alan Bloom. How are you?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about Ishbosheth, Saul's son.
Right.
There was sort of wasn't there a period where they were both kings? And I don't know what that story is about, but
Yeah. The Bible does talk about Saul's son. After Saul is dead, when Saul and Jonathan are killed by the Philistines at the Battle of Mount Gilboa, Ishbosheth is the son of. His name probably wasn't Ishbosheth. Ishbosheth means a man who's an embarrassment. That's like Jezebel. Her name wasn't Jezebel, which means, shitmouth. Her name was probably something with Baal, Ishbaal, which was a woman of Baal. But we Israelites like to make epithets for those we don't like. So Ishbosheth is a man of Busha. He's the surviving son of Saul who claims the throne and is totally ineffective, and everybody ignores him, and he runs around for a while until David has him knocked off, until he's assassinated by unknown people. And Ishbosheth tries to claim the monarchy. It doesn't work. And David is really elected king, to the point where he's ignored by Jewish history. He's in the Torah, he's in the Bible. We do recognize him, but he's essentially ignored. And we talk about King Saul, King David, and King Solomon, the three major kings of Israel. And then in the year 930, it splits in half, Israel and Judah. And it remains until 721, when the northern kingdom is obliterated and ceases to be Jewish and becomes half Israel, half pagan, Samaritans. And the kingdom of Judah remains, which is why when the Persian Empire comes to be, they call the whole area Judah. They call it Yehud. The Persian name is Yehud. And we, of course, are the Yehudim. So that's where Jews come from. We are the Judahites. Our religion is properly known as Judaism. It's not named after my wife, Judy. It's not Judaism. It's Judaism. So the two monarchies were, to tell you the truth, what made them worthwhile was the fact that the kings did not run everything. Even though they were powerful, there were always prophets who rose up and who spoke to keep the kings in line. And this is where all of our prophets come from. They were religious men. They did not run the temple in Jerusalem, Bethel, or Dan. They did not work in the three temples. They were religious leaders who were preachers, and they were talking about morality and righteousness and following God's justice. And you can read their books. So you'll get some history of the two monarchies. There's not much that was wonderful about the two monarchies. They were petty political states. Any other questions?
I have one.
Sure.
So when we do a DNA test and we find out we're 90% Ashkenazi, does that mean we're from the two tribes from the southern area of?
No. In fact, my belief is that all the Ashkenazim are, we're all probably Khazars, or we're all a bunch of crazy, wild Europeans who converted to Judaism.
I'm sorry,
Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If you look at the Jews of Egypt and the Muslim world, they are short, brown people with black hair and black eyes. Us white-skinned, tall people from Europe, we are undoubtedly, all of us, converts. Now, what does that mean? I am a direct descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob because I choose to be. I assure you, there are a couple of Palestinian terrorists running around who are descendants of biological descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but they ain't Jews, and I am. So, Ashkenazi Jews, I freely admit and tell all my Sephardic friends, you're the real Jews. We're the Jews who glommed on. After
Rabbi?
all, from a bunch of Polacks. Seriously.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Gary Fox?
Yeah.
Leslie had her maternal DNA tested. She's Ashkenazi descent. Her maternal DNA is from the Middle East. So it wasn't, Ashkenazi maybe mostly European, but certainly from Leslie's.
Well, without doubt, don't forget, somebody had to convert all those crazy Polacks. And it's clear that, you see, the big issue is this, that when the Roman Empire existed, with the final destruction of Jerusalem in the year 132 of the Common Era, the Jews were within the Roman Empire. All those Jews in the Roman world were essentially Sephardim. They were direct biological descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as much as anything can be proven. What happened then is that Judaism began to change. If you remember, the Crusades come hard on the end of the Roman and the Holy Roman Empire. The Crusades drove the Jews out of England, France, and the Rhine River Valley. These were parts of the Roman Empire, and they had Jews, they had Jewish communities, many of which go back to the beginning of the Roman Empire. Those Jews, quite assuredly, were biological Jews, as well as religious Jews. The problem is when you look at those Jews being kicked out of France, England, and the Rhine River Valley, they are basically expelled between 1000 and 1300, those 300 years when the Crusades were happening. And of course, I'm greatly simplifying. So if you take the Crusades from 1000 to 1300, and you look at how many Jews were kicked out of England and how many Jews were kicked out of France, and a whole lot of Jews kicked out of Germany, the whole lot of Jews kicked out of Germany, it may number 10 or 15,000. The Jews kicked out of England, if they number 5,000, that's a lot, because we have this listed in English history. You know, the town of Lincoln says 215 Jews were kicked out. In Paris, there were in France, less than 5,000 Jews. So even if you look hard and double the number, you're going to get about 50,000 Jews being kicked out of Western Europe at the time of the Crusades, and they essentially all go to Poland, because the Poland was becoming an empire. The Polish king was liberal. I know you may find that hard to believe, that Poland was once a great empire and liberal and progressive. It was. And the Jews flocked there. And so we know that these 50,000 Jews basically move over to Poland, and they move over to Eastern Europe. They are the biological descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The issue is that within 200 years, by 1500, you got 3 million Jews running around Poland. Now, 50,000 Jews cannot become 3 million Jews in 200 years. You know, we just couldn't do that. So somehow we made more Jews. And that's where people are convinced that the Jews from Western Europe came over and they started converting people, or converted the Khazars, or the Pole. It's not clear. But yes, the Polish Jews have biologically Jewish blood in them. There's no question about that. Somebody had to convert all those Polacks. And as a direct descendant of one of those crazy Polacks, I'm very proud to think that it was one of the real Jews who converted my wild ancestors and civilized them.
Rabbi, have you ever had your DNA tested?
I have, and my DNA says they just go back to the fact that I am 100% Polak, and they blame 50% of me on Warsaw and 50% of me on Vilna. Personally, I am offended by the 50% Vilna. The thought that I might be related to Litvaks is very repugnant, and you know, it's a difficult thing, because being a Warsaw purebred Polish Jew is much better yichus than being a Litvak or a Galicianer.
Rabbi, is that Y DNA or just the cousin testing? Because Y DNA goes back thousands of years. And
all I know, they didn't go back further than that.
Well, it's Y. If you have to have Y DNA for your deep ancestry, a maternal DNA for a woman.
Well, and the reality is that from what I've understood, I think all human beings are actually descended from 3 different females. I mean, I read that once, and you know, so, but the fact is that, you know, my ancestors, look, I can go back, I think 8 generations, which actually is amazing. And the fact is, I'm readily admitting that before 1500, my ancestors probably were not Jewish. However, you know, my ancestors are who I say they are. When one is adopted, your biology tends to disappear. And it's you know, Judaism says it's the people who raise you the people who teach you how to think, the people who teach you how to act.
Just go off.
That's really your culture, you know? And so, you know, if you look at me, look, I am one generation out of Warsaw, and I've been back there. And let me tell you, I ain't a Polak. I'm an American boy.
Rabbi,
Yes.
basically, many years ago, we did a Tay-Sachs testing at Bethel, and I was asked to speak for Tay-Sachs, and I went through the literature at that time, which was very strongly for the Ashkenazim being Khazars. More recently, I have been reading that this is no longer the view, that the chromosomes, all these studies are showing that we are much closer to the Sephardim than was thought when we did this, which was unfortunately close to 50 years ago. Also, it's interesting that the Kohanim genes appear the same, both in the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim, and even in a black group in South Africa.
Yeah, the Lamba, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, to tell you the truth, the fact that there are black Jewish Jews, black people have Jewish genes in Africa is not only not surprising, it's absolutely understandable, because let's face it, we know for a fact that the Israelites did trading down the coast of Africa. And so that some of the Jewish boys who were on barges going down up and down the African coast.
Their mommies told them not to.
I know, but you know, they spent the night, and all I can tell you is the famous
Never stop them.
The famous story of Shaka Zulu. I read Shaka's history, and Shaka, one of his favorite Europeans, was a Jew by the name of Abraham Abrahams, which why Mrs. Abraham named her kid Abraham is beyond me. But one of the white traders who plied the coast of Africa in the 1840s was Abraham Abrahams, a British Jew, and Shaka offered him his harem many nights. And Abraham left some seed there, we're sure. So there are some Zulu Warriors who undoubtedly are also related to the Kohanim.
And in Morocco, they talk about the Bedouins, and you know how so many of them actually do some of our rituals.
And we know the Bedouins were often Jewish.
Right. I mean, and there were tribes, there were Jewish tribes. Mohammed talks about the fact that there were Jewish Bedouin tribes throughout Northern Africa and Saudi Arabia. And the Jews, don't forget, we are an ancient people. The question of biology, however, is by and large irrelevant, because it's come down, the rabbis are quite clear about that. When they talk about when one converts to Judaism, when someone converts to Judaism, the rabbis of the Talmud ask the question, can a convert, a Jew by choice, say the prayer, Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov? The rabbis ask because they're not biologically descended from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They are a ger, they are a Jew by choice who just converted in. And the rabbinic answer is they must say that prayer, because even though they were not biological descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob before they converted, now that they have converted, they are direct spiritual descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they are required to say that prayer. In other words, we don't recognize biology. We recognize spirituality. Now, of course, the rabbis, they're not idiots. They ask the question, well, okay, so when one converts, they're like a brand new baby. So that means if you convert into Judaism and your sister converts to Judaism, then you're both like newborn babies and you can get married? And the rabbinic answer is, schmuck, don't be stupid. No, you can't. You're still brother and sister, but spiritually.
But just on top of that, though, it is today it's considered biologic, since anybody who was born of a Jewish mother is considered Jewish.
Right, and the problem is that, but it was like that for years, Jules. But to tell you the truth, that's dying, because the state of Israel itself in 1960 shot it down and said, we don't buy that. If you convert out,
okay,
if your mother was, you're out. So in other words, Brother Daniel, when you converted out of Judaism, I don't care your mother was Jewish. You're not a Jew anymore. You were born Jewish, your mother was Jewish, now you're a priest. Sorry, you're not a Jew. So today, although the standard definition is still born of a Jewish mother, you're a Jew, it doesn't work. And that's why we're moving towards a new definition of what Jew. It's not enough to be born of a Jewish mother, because the government of Israel ruled, if you're born of a Jewish mother and you convert to Catholicism, you're out. Anyone else have any questions?
Rabbi, there's a question in the chat box from Kent Hochberg. So have you changed your views on intermarriage?
Have I changed my views on intermarriage? No, not at all. My views about intermarriage are that many Gentiles are wonderful, sweet people, and they're much nicer than many Jews. And if you want to marry one, that's your business. However, the problem is that since I'm talking about Judaism as a spiritual foundation, as a cultural identity, I oppose intermarriage as a generality, because I'm going to make the generality that if two Jews marry, the odds are easier for them to raise a Jewish kid. Now, to tell you the truth, most of the Gentiles I have met who have converted to Judaism have turned out to be better Jews than a lot of people born Jewish. So I'm not telling you that if you marry another Jew, everything is hunky-dory and wonderful. What I'm telling you is that as a generality, it's better for a Jew to marry a Jew than for a Jew to marry a non-Jew. And the easiest thing I'll say to you is, imagine a fanatical liberal Democrat marrying a radical Republican.
We have that already.
Right, but I'm telling you, how do you think that's going to work?
Well,
And what are they going
Farville.
and what is going to happen with their children? That's the question.
They'll be liberals like they should be.
Well, but that's the issue. So it's not that I dislike intermarriage. It is that it is harder. It is hard enough for two Jews to raise Jewish children. And essentially, that is my goal, that Jews should marry Jews and raise Jewish children. Having said that, I point out to you that those intermarried people who joined my synagogue throughout my lifetime, I found amazingly supportive. You know, these Christians, they took religion seriously. They weren't like the Jews. They said, oh, we have to pay synagogue dues. We have to send our kids to Hebrew school. And I think one or two Rosh Hashanahs, I stood up and said, thank you to them. I said, you know, it's not anything against Christians. Christianity is a wonderful religion. If you want to be a Christian, be a Christian. Personally, I'd rather you be a Jew. So My stance on intermarriage is only from the continuation of Judaism, because Judaism is the culture that I am expounding.
Isn't
Rabbi,
it always true that converts are, use the word holier than basic?
I hesitate to generalize. That's not fair. But I will tell you, my experience has been many times I have been overwhelmed at the seriousness and the support that that the Gentile spouses of my congregants have experienced, and how they come to services, support the synagogue, raise their kids as Jews, and they take all this crap seriously. Whereas the Jew says, oh, we don't have to go, we don't have to pay the dues, we don't have to do this, we have to do that, you know.
Well, they obviously take it more seriously.
Right. So far be it from me to tell you that, you know, Christian, something wrong with Christian. No. As I've said, I'm just saying as a generality, when I'm up there pontificating, again, it's harder for a Democrat and a Republican to marry. It's harder for a Brent Jew and a Brent Catholic to marry. It's easier. And the priests and the ministers will agree with me. And to them, faith is individual, whereas for us, it's familial. But they'll tell you too, if you are a believing Catholic and you marry a fundamental Protestant, you'll think you're not going to have problems.
All right, last question of the evening from Dudley Cunningham. Will you be offering more classes like this in the future?
Yeah, probably. If the synagogue wants me to do more classes, I would probably do more classes. Thank you very much. It has been an honor, and I appreciate, Rabbi, you're allowing me to this opportunity, and I appreciate my former congregants and current friends who all tuned in and willingly put themselves in harm's way by listening to me.
Thank you so much.
Please join me in thanking Rabbi Wisnia.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Right.